Okay, welcome back everybody to the main stage of Design for Planet Festival 2023. Now, as a MC, I'm not meant to have a favourite session, but as I lead design programmes at the UK's Innovation Accelerator for Cities and Transport, and as a self-confessed sociology of transport nerd, I have to confess this is the one I'm most looking forward to. Transport, the way that we move to where we need to be, the way we get to work, to play, to look after one another, to our loved ones, is an area where collaborative design is needed the most. In the UK, the transport represents about 17% of our carbon emissions. We need to shift to sustainable and often electric modes of transport. Design is critical for ensuring the greening of transport is the easy, the safe, and the inclusive choice. To host this conversation this morning, we have the wonderful Nicole Agba, who leads Innovate UK's Design Innovation Network, which brings together designers and businesses around innovation challenges. Nicole has a background in vehicle product design, having worked at Lotus and Ford. She's the creator of the Silent Designers podcast that IUK produce, and I really recommend you check it out. An excellent way to explain to partners the power of design, particularly in the spaces that we all work in. Nicole is from Norwich, down the road, so we're thrilled to have the perfect person present this session. So I'll leave you, Nicole, to introduce your panel.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much for that enthusiastic introduction, and welcome to this exciting session. I also am not supposed to have a favourite session, but I'm completely biased, love transportation, and both my job at KTN and previously in automotive has focused on collaboration. I think it's the key in order to progress and move us forward. It's a pleasure to be here with such a distinguished panel of experts, which I'd like to invite up to the stage now. And we're going to look at, and they're at the forefront of reshaping how we think about transportation. So I'd like to welcome Rosslyn, Ali, and Hannah up to the stage.
I won't get your toes, don't worry. I've got this squishy chair.
Fabulous. Each one of our experts has an amazing biography, which I'm sure will unfold as we go out through the session, but I've summarised a little bit about them. So with over 30 years experience, Rosslyn is a leader in heritage, environmental and transport sectors, and her work at Sustrans is focused on integrating cycling and walking networks and driving positive change. Thank you, Rosslyn. Next up, we have Ali. Ali's dedicated his entire career to promoting sustainable travel for individuals and communities. He established LiftShare in 1998 during his university days and has gone on to build a thriving platform that connects people sharing rides. And on the end, we've got Hannah. Hannah's a GP, registrar, Mobility Foundation governor, and former deputy leader of the Women's Equality Party. She's also an expert at Design Council and specialises in equality, diversity and inclusion with a focus on disability. So thank you all to our panel. As we embark on this journey into the future, it's important for us to acknowledge the critical need for change. Our current transportation systems contribute significantly to environmental degradation, air pollution and climate change. It's high time that we envisioned a world where our mobility choices not only meet our needs, but also harmonise with the planet. It can be very difficult to do this, I think, when the current systems we have in place, the current infrastructure, and our growing need and demand to try and think about the future. But let's pause for a moment, take a step out from under that rock of heaviness, and take a look into what the future of mobility could be, a future that includes everybody and also supports the planet. So our panelists are going to share their insights and practical solutions that help us transition to what that future is. We'll also open the floor up at the end for questions both in the room and online. So, I'll kick off with our first question. So, what do you see as the most significant barrier to achieving sustainable mobility on a larger scale, and how can these be addressed? I'll start with you, Rosslyn.
Okay, thank you. So I would say that the three things that are the barriers, or the things that we need to overcome are, first of all, funding, need money to do things. The second one is to have great projects, so it's things that you want to do, that you want to, the change that you want to make. And then the third one is the political willingness to make that thing happen. And I think that's the three. And often we have like two of the three. And it's pretty rare to have all three because, just because of the world, how the world is. So what a lot of my job is, and I'm the director for the North of England for Sustrans, so a lot of my job is about influencing politicians so that they're making the right choices and putting the right policies in place. It's to seek funding for projects to happen and also influence the political agenda so that funding just becomes available. And most of all, leading an amazing team, which I have a fantastic team, and all of Sustrans we're a fantastic organisation. I absolutely love working for Sustrans. People who are really determined to create amazing projects that really make a change for people's lives and help people walk or cycle for everyday journeys. And I think if we have those three things, that's how we get that, that perfection. And when we don't have those things, or when we don't have one of those is missing, it's really, really difficult to make progress.
Ali, would you like to add any more to that?
So sustainable mobility, I think, isn't really a technical issue for the large part. Yes, you need decent cycleways so you can cycle, but mostly it's a behavioural one. We have the resources, the capacity to cut emissions from transport by probably 80% this year if we wanted to. We've got seats in cars, we've got space on roads. We just allocate things in an odd way, and we prioritise things in an odd way, and we focus on buying new stuff rather than sharing stuff. I mean, in one of our areas of work in terms of lift sharing, like 90% of cars are driven alone. A car is therefore inefficient. A bus is also very inefficient if it's only got one person in it. But a car with 4 people in it is better than going by train. A bus full is better than going by train too. So let's think about how we use what we've got and start thinking politically about how to shift behaviours, because the biggest barrier, as was just said, is selfishness, and was it selfishness, greed and apathy. So let's work with that. Let's let people be selfish, but give them better options, or the information that shows that there are better options available. Greed, well, people like having money, so let's show them that sustainable options are cheaper than how they're currently. And apathy, let's just make it really easy for them and just shove them along the journey slowly. They don't need to go from driving on their own to walking 100 miles. They can go from driving alone to sharing, or they can go from driving down to the shops 3 days a week to doing it once a week. We just need to change behaviours and support what people are doing. And for that, we need to, fundamentally change how we approach transport by putting people at the centre of it and not just shifting along the current projects we've got, because at the moment it's not working. Transport actually produces 27% of the emissions. It's the single largest source of emissions. It's the only one that's either stayed static or gone up in the last 20 or 30 years. It needs a fundamental shift, which is why this session is so important.
So I suppose for me it's all about buy-in. And that's buy-in of the consumer and also buy-in from the kind of infrastructure, the political sphere, the industrial sphere. So, as a doctor, we have this saying that the most useless drug I can prescribe is one that somebody won't take. And it happens all the time. We're constantly prescribing stuff and they're just like, no thanks, doesn't sound great, but I'll take the bit of paper away to make you feel better. And I think it's exactly the same with design. And as a disabled person, you see so many things where this has been designed for us, and pat on the head, what a lovely thing to do. But they've never actually clearly spoken to a disabled person about what we need. And that is why, as disabled people, we make 38% fewer journeys a year than non-disabled people, and that statistic has not changed in 20 years. So I think we need to kind of think about getting the buy-in, because if you don't have that co-production model, if you don't have people from different minoritized groups represented from very first principles, they're not going to use it. and it will just sit there looking very pretty, being utterly useless. So I think that buy-in is really important. But you also need to bring industry and you need to bring decision makers along on that journey with you and explain to them the importance of that co-production and the importance of that scheme. And this is something we've really seen, and that I'll try and expand on later, in our kind of electric vehicle charging accessibility charter that we've created at Motability, where if you don't have industry and if you don't have the politicians behind it, you cannot get the changes you need made. So for me, it's all about buy-in and getting people along on the journey with you, literally and figuratively.
Yeah, it does very much feel like there's a need to embed that human-centered design, as well as honouring and respecting our planetary boundaries and the needs of the transportation needs for everyone. Because I've seen in multiple areas, and I take Norwich for example. Sorry. Take Norwich for example. It's doing a great job of trying to meet its net zero targets and net zero goals, and needs to kind of further look at that lens of accessibility into it. So the city centre, for example, has moved to a more pedestrianised zone. This happened a lot during COVID, and there's been an impact then on those with physical and then also hidden mobilities that people can't see, and that kind of all needs to be taken into consideration. So I echo your point of sometimes people, clearly the right people, haven't been spoken to, and so there's a real need for that human-centred and human-led design, as well as honouring the planetary boundaries, as well as honouring what we actually need to function in society. Thinking about that, Rosslyn, you mentioned about talking to politicians in order to kind of get buy-in, and Hannah, you mentioned the same thing. How can governments and communities collaborate to accelerate a transition to sustainable transport systems?
Yes, it's really important, and it just actually reminded me. Hannah was talking about physical barriers. So Sustrans is most well known for the National Cycle Network. It's 12,000 miles of routes that actually, although it's called the National Cycle Network, actually 50% of our users are walking or wheeling and cycling. We've got 12,000 miles of route, that's great, but we also did an audit and found that we got 12,000 barriers. So we basically got a barrier every mile. What do we mean by barrier? We mean often like a kind of a squeezy kind of metal gate that you can just about fit a normal bicycle through. Absolutely rubbish for anybody else that's trying to get onto that route. And so we're partway through a massive programme to remove those barriers, those physical barriers to the National Cycle Network. And it's absolutely brilliant. The before and after photos are just fantastic, because you have all these huge barriers and all sorts of ridiculous contraptions that designers have designed to try and keep out people with scrambler bikes, or people who are using little buggers and stuff. So they're trying to keep those people out because it's antisocial behaviour. And so we have to work very closely with local politicians, in particular, like local councillors, to persuade them that actually, if we remove these barriers, if we redesign these barriers and open them up, then actually we'll get more people using them. We'll have greater accessibility. It's actually part of the Equality Act anyway. It's a statutory duty. But there's really great reasons, because the more people who are using those routes, actually the antisocial behaviour just goes down naturally, and also we need to basically be policing those routes. So that's a project that's really, really satisfying. And in terms of that lived experience, we as Sustrans and my team, we knew that this was an issue and knew this was a problem, but it was really only brought to life for me last month when we had a team away day, and we actually recreated some of these barriers and got a whole load of different sort of accessible cycles that we could all actually try using. And we also tried to get them through these sort of recreated barriers, and it was so frustrating, you just could not get through. And I was like, so I had lots of photos of me kind of looking really unhappy and grumpy and annoyed. But then I was able to take that to, it was Leeds City Council, and I was able to take them to one of their top transportation guys and go, look, there's me trying to get through one of your barriers that your team's designed and has recently put in as a new thing. He's like, oh yeah, I can see that's a problem. Yeah. It really is a problem, so we can influence in that way. I think that lived experience is really important.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, as somebody who lives in a wheelchair and works in Leeds, thank you. We need it. Boy, do we need it. So, shockingly, as a disabled ex-politico, I'm going to highlight the fact that we have very few disabled people in politics, and our politics is not representative at all for any minoritized community. I think disabled people make up less than 2% of MPs. We're very underrepresented at council level as well. And, if you take it from a gender perspective, similarly, I think it's less than 34% of MPs are female. And if you have the people designing the infrastructure not having, regularly pushed a buggy on and off a train or anything like that, you're not going to get it right. So I think we do need to take a step back and look at our systems of governance more widely. And fundamentally, it's about looking around the room and thinking, right, who is not here? It's as simple as that. Who is not in this room? Who is not contributing to this conversation? And if they're not here, how the hell do we get them in? Because, I'm very done with a very specific stereotype of politician making decisions on my behalf. I'm so over that now. So I think we need to kind of think about those elements of stuff. But the most frustrating thing for me is that these networks are out there. There are so many local community groups focusing on race, on ethnicity, on disability, on gender, on sexuality, that are begging community leaders to work with them, that are begging councils to listen to them. And it just becomes another tick box exercise. It becomes another thing that has to be done and another noisy group in their ear that they feel they need to pay attention to occasionally so they can tick that diversity box, because we all love a tick box exercise, don't we? And I think it's just about normalising those conversations and kind of looking around going, right, we need to get these voices involved and we need to understand the challenges the current infrastructure presents. And it shouldn't necessarily get to the stage where I have to put a politician in a wheelchair and go crack on then, because actually that's a terrible way of integrating inclusion, because you're never going to understand the lived experience of a disabled person by sitting in a wheelchair for 10 minutes going, oh no, this is really hard. Yeah, genius. But also, I've spent a lot of time, I've found ways around this, and actually you can get a very negative experience of my day-to-day life as a disabled person by playing disabled for a bit. But it is a really useful opportunity, I think, to kind of say to people, right, it sucked for 5 minutes for you. How are we going to mean this doesn't happen in the first place? Leeds City Council shouldn't have put in blooming barriers in the first place. It's that simple. And why were you not? We have to learn from the lessons of the past. We have to sit there and go, who decided to do this? Why did we decide to do this? How are we going to make sure we don't make similarly silly decisions like this in the future? And if we're constantly having to go in subsequent to these decisions being made and change things, then we're constantly duplicating work, and that's not efficient.
Ali, would you like to add anything else?
Yeah, I'm just dwelling on the thought of who is not here. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful line, because the amazing thing that happened when we were at university was the internet arrived and it enabled everyone to be in the room all at once, as is everyone now joining us here. So the internet gives us this incredible way of asking people what they want and getting that feedback and then giving them solutions. So in terms of collaborating, I mean, I look at what we do with companies. So we ran LiftShare for 25 years, but first 20 years, pretty much silo mentality on LiftShare, let's get everyone sharing cars. And then the pandemic came along and suddenly people were told not to share cars. So we pivoted a bit and started working out how can we use all of our data insights to help inform our clients about how their staff can get to work, where they should work, if they can work locally, what they should do differently. And through that, built a whole different company that's all focused on being very customer-centric and getting as many people in that room as possible so they can give their voices. And it's amazing when you ask individuals rather than anonymous people who they are, where they live, where they work, how they want to travel, and then you can say, well, actually, you can travel this way and you can't travel that way. And you've got so many of them, you can say, well, actually, let's put a new bus here. And we've got whole new bus routes going into industrial estates around the country based on where people want to travel, because we've asked everybody who is in that room. And whether it's disabled people, people who need to travel later to work, all of their individual requirements can be put into that information. And then the system designed from the base up rather than just assuming let's take what we've got and doing it differently. So if I was trying to think how to, from a government level, I would just take that and scale it up. Ask the audience, take the national travel census or the national census and have a bigger bit on mobility and ask individuals where they live, where they work, where they need to get to, what barriers they have, what solutions they would consider, what they wouldn't do, and then use that data to completely redesign the whole system in order to make it much better for everyone. And you could do that really quickly and far cheaper than you can build a new roundabout.
Yeah, yes, true.
Third up, so I'll start with you, Hannah. Are there any innovative technologies or approaches that you believe will play a pivotal role in shaping the future of sustainable mobility?
Yes. So, yeah, I think there are. I think thinking about, the movement towards AI, all of this stuff is really important. And there is a lot of really exciting kind of technological advances going on, particularly in the disabled sphere. So take this very fancy wheelchair, and this always gets designers excited, which is why I always bring this particular wheelchair to stuff like this. So this chair has been designed with disabled people, and the reason it's so great is because the front wheel is made up of, I think it's 24 individual wheels that go sideways, so I can turn on a dime. It's really fancy, it makes my life a hell of a lot easier, and it divides into 4 different parts. So I can break it up, put it in the back of my car, crack on with my life. I have complete independence to do that. And yet, if you look at the vast majority of mobility options, that's not the case. It's an absolute nightmare. And then when you look at things like how we create wheelchair accessible vehicles, if your chair isn't something that you can easily break up and take apart, then you have to be able to roll it directly into the back of your car. If you want to roll it directly into your car and then drive that car, you need a full wheelchair accessible vehicle. We cannot currently make those electric vehicles because where you have to place hoists and all of the fancy tech for the wheelchair element is where you would normally put a battery. And there is currently no design in the world that enables us to turn an electric vehicle into a wheelchair accessible vehicle. And I think that's a really key example of when we're talking about kind of sustainable transport and the technology we use going forwards, where actually all of the big car companies are not thinking about this because it's not considered a big enough market, because the number of people needing these vehicles is so small that they don't see the financial benefit in designing vehicles that these people can use. And then you have people like me at the Motability Foundation going, so what am I meant to give them when we don't have anything other than electric vehicles? How are these people meant to get around? And at the moment, we don't have a solution for that. And so whilst it's terrifying that we're moving the goalposts when it comes to EV vehicle rollouts and that sort of stuff, there's a part of me that's going, well, we blooming need all the time we can get because we have no solution for this. So I think there is a lot of really exciting tech out there, but the problem is that we're working within markets that don't see us as being financially viable. And the impact of that down the line is going to be to further isolate already minoritized communities. So there is some exciting tech out there, but before we get really excited about that, we need to think about how that's available to everybody, because at the moment, a lot of the time it isn't.
Sorry. Ali, would you like to add any more? And also thinking about accessibility, obviously physical accessibility, but I know that part of the lift share program is also making it financially accessible. There's a lot of, when it comes to sustainable transportation, there's a lot of really cool things like electric cars, for example, but if you're in working class, it's highly unlikely that you'd be able to access something like that. So what other technologies are and innovations are there out there that are also financially accessible for people?
Well, sharing, as Baz said earlier. If you can make your phone last twice as long, it's half the price and it's half the waste. Exactly the same with sharing. You share a car, half the cost, half the emissions, half the road space, half the parking, and it's a lot more fun and sociable. So it's not an innovation, although it might feel like it because at the moment everyone's doing everything on their own. But it's finding ways to get people to share more, designed for sharing rather than designed for purchasing. All products should be designed for sharing from the bottom up. I think it's really interesting looking at what's going on in Italy right now. Earlier when I was talking about data, they've basically mandated now that every single company with over 100 people has to have a mobility manager, where they have to collect the data about how staff are travelling and how they could travel, and then they have to feed that up to council level, and then the council have to feed it up to government level. So very quickly, they get data from all these companies about where there's overlaps, where there are underlaps, like where people can travel. And then, so now in Italy, they can rapidly revolutionise how people are travelling. In France, they've taken a different approach. For sharing, they've got a goal to triple the number of people carpooling to work in 5 years, to triple it in 5 years. For a budget, I think they've allocated 150 million euros. In a way, that seems like a lot. Compared to a bit of road, it's nothing. And they reckon through clever behaviour change, through working with the tech companies and through some really good marketing, they can triple the number of people carpooling. So in terms of innovation, sharing is something we've all done all of our lives since we were created, but we just don't do enough of it. So I would focus on designing systems for more sharing, because it's the thing that means we don't consume so much, and it has the biggest impact. I mean, we could, as I said earlier, we can cut emissions by 80% tomorrow if we shared more.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I think real innovation probably isn't electric vehicles, because actually the electric vehicles still cause the same sort of congestion and pollution from brake dust and from tyre wear, and so that and also just makes us car dependent. But they are part of the solution, of course, but not the solution. But I think electric bikes are probably part of that solution. So my father-in-law, he's nearly 80. He's been a lifelong sort of Brompton foldable bike sort of geek. And when Brompton brought out their electric bike, he switched to that. And it's really given him that extra push. He was sort of starting to think, I'm getting a bit old, I'm getting, various different complications. And it's given him a real new lease of life, being able to use that electric bike. And I was talking to two people just earlier this morning who have been working with Switchbike, and Switchbike are basically, they put electric motors on your current bike. So I'm thinking, I could have my Brompton, I could make it into an electric version and help me get up those hills. There was amazing, surprisingly high number of hills in Norwich. I did not know this. I did not expect this. I was like, wow, I thought it was flat. So it was fine. An amazing, really lovely cycling infrastructure. I could cycle right from the station all the way through the town centre to my hotel, and then from the hotel all the way here, all on off-road cycle route, which was just beautiful, so well done. The other technological advance that I think we can use, I think it's already there, and talking to Ali, I think, Ali, we need to have a more in-depth conversation afterwards, because one of my things is my organisation spends an awful lot of time talking to communities about creating low-traffic neighbourhoods. We all know that, somebody I met this morning was saying, what about low-traffic neighbourhoods? Are you involved in those? Yes, we are. Yes, it's really difficult. Yes, we do have solutions. We do a lot of co-discovery, co-design, co-delivery with local communities to, figure out how we basically try and remove car traffic from the places that they live, and it's hard, but we're getting there. We're learning how to do it much better as we progress. But I keep thinking, why is this traffic going through these small neighbourhoods? What's driving that? What's literally driving that is people's use of mapping apps, often Google Maps. Google Maps will take you through a small neighbourhood because it'll save you, 30 seconds, a minute, instead of taking you on the normal route that's designed for your journey on the strategic network. And so actually, what Google could do is stop offering that as an option. And now I am talking to Google, but I think Ali and I probably need to have this is the conversation I'd like to have, is to kind of go, because Google will know also where all those journeys, where people are going. They know where people are setting off from and going every minute of every day, unless you've taken that off your app. They know where you are. They know where you're going. They don't necessarily make it public, but could they share it with people, like us, anonymised, so that we do know, because that data is there, and it's just really frustrating to me that it's not being used. And the reason it's not being used is they want us to pay huge amounts of money for it. But they could do a beautiful thing, and they could share that data. So maybe that's what we can work on together.
I have a solution for that.
Great.
So if you can all get your data from Google, or your transport data, where you've been, sadly about 30% of us have it, about 30% of us. If we all got that, you could then put it into a tool that could then say, well, this is where everyone's traveling, and do it collectively. Google will never give you that information en masse. They won't do it. We've tried.
Okay.
But we, as consumers, we can get that information and then put it into a tool that could then sort it all out. So
Cool.
together we could do that.
Let's do that.
Great.
Let's collaborate.
Collaboration. So I'm going to go into some individual questions. Ali, I'll start with you. So how's LiftShare evolved over the years to become such a successful platform for ride sharing?
Well,
Popular before ride sharing was even a thing.
yeah. I mean, people have been sharing cars forever, but when I set up LiftShare 25 years ago now, I had, a bit like Baz was talking about earlier, I had no business sense, I'd never run a business, I had never, couldn't code, I was absolutely rubbish at computers, even though I had long hair. But I'd been traveling around the world, luckily in my gap year, and seen firsthand the amazing benefits of sharing, just how much more fun it was, how much cheaper it was. Luckily for me, the timing was great because the internet was pretty much arriving as I was at university, and I persuaded a very good friend of mine to build probably the first sharing website to see if we could actually get the internet to help people to share stuff. So we managed to find somewhere in Canada we could host this weird thing called a website, and got people at Bristol Uni to start sharing cars to and from London and then to other universities, and then started promoting around freshers' fairs, and it kind of took off. We built a free public network that anyone could join and use absolutely for free, where they could match up with other people, and we then made our money by setting up schemes for companies, employers, hospitals, communities, so they could have their own bespoke LiftShare scheme. Fast forward 25 years, we've had over 1 million people join the network. We've saved over 1 billion car miles, and all was going swimmingly well. However, in terms of what's changed on the journey, one thing I guess that's good for transport and for sharing is that in the early 2010s, sharing suddenly became cool. 2 designers in San Francisco designed a rather cool thing called Airbnb that made sharing super cool. And then a thing called Uber arrived a few years later that suddenly made transport cool. And this sector that I've been in for about 10 years then went from being very historic and no one thought would ever change, to suddenly thinking this is the hottest ticket in town, and literally billions of dollars poured in. And so there we were sitting in sleepy old Norwich, beautiful sleepy old Norwich, wondering how a social enterprise could survive and thrive in that kind of a market. And we did something, we've done lots of things, but I think this is worth sharing because I would encourage others who have got businesses older than 5 years to look at it. We basically set up another company to destroy ourselves. We set up a company to disrupt ourselves. We basically gave half the team all of our spare cash, all the best designers, all of our best marketeers, and said, you've got a year to create a new business to compete with the core business and see if you can do a better job. You can do what you like within that frame, as long as you share any knowledge you gain in that year back with the core team. And the core team basically said, right, you carry on doing what you're doing, you focus on the clients, you look after them and build give them the best service you could do, but you've got no tech innovation going on. Within 12 months, we canned the project. We'd learned so much from doing that we decided we're going to bring the 2 teams back together, took all the lessons, and basically rebuilt ourselves from the bottom up with all those insights. And for the next 5 years, we flew. I mean, we were growing incredibly fast. It was all good. Until in March 2020, Boris announced that we were going into lockdown. No more working from the office, and no more sharing. Sharing was not allowed, apparently. So that slightly disrupted us, but we had seen what we'd learned from the disruption before and how we disrupted ourselves. We'd also learned how important real customer centricity is. So the first thing we did, literally within a week of lockdown, we surveyed, at the time, probably 700,000 members to ask them what they were doing, how they were coping with the pandemic, how they saw their future world of work going. We also surveyed all of our clients, so about 700 big corporates, what they were doing, what they're experiencing. And so within a month, we had a huge amount of data that basically said the commute will never be the same again. people were already working from home and loving it. So people didn't want to go back to the office 5 days a week. And we basically just let load. So we set up a new company, which was Mobility Ways, to focus on that data bit, and then LiftShare basically carried on surviving really for a couple of years while sharing wasn't on, and more recently, because of the cost of living and sharing's back on the agenda, it's taken off again. So we've now got 2 businesses, but Mobility Ways is really interesting because it is all about surveying users. So we ask individuals where they travel, how they travel, why they don't travel, and then we also look, based on every individual journey, how they could travel. So you can see, these people who say they can walk on cycle, can they? Is it close enough? What are their barriers? These people who say they'll car share, can they? Is there someone living near them? These people who said they go by bus, oh, there isn't one. Could there be? If there was a bus, would you use it? Oh, we've got your email address. We can tell you that there is, or we can give you a pilot. So we've evolved from being, I guess, on a very specific mission about getting everyone sharing into thinking, actually, to win hearts and minds, we have to get stakeholders involved, all stakeholders, not just individuals. We have to work out how to engage with the policy people and the senior people at companies, and by giving them the data and the insights to basically show that you are currently here, your commuter emissions are the biggest source of emissions of your entire company right now, but you could cut them next year by 20% by spending this tiny amount of money or doing this thing. Those insights have enabled us to completely, I guess, stay ahead of our game and compete with some of these really big companies, and to keep lift sharing relevant, because the issue with lift sharing is there's no money in it for anyone, but you have to make the case for it. So by putting it on a level playing field with walking, cycling, bus, train, drive alone, you can suddenly see that lift sharing is actually a really good option for many people, as are the other options. So that's our sort of little journey.
That's awesome. Thank you very much for sharing that, Ali. Hannah, could you share an example of a project or initiative that effectively prioritised inclusivity and diversity in the transport sector?
Yeah,
Not Leeds Council, by the way.
I will stop ranting about Leeds Council, I promise. I'll move on to York. They're great. No, I'm joking. So one of the big things, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, was this EV accessibility charter we created. So this is something that the Motability Foundation... So most of you will have probably heard of Motability, the scheme that gets people with disabilities cars. Some people are nodding. Great. So if you get personal independence payments, you can get an uplift for mobility, and you can give that to Motability and get a car in return. And we keep it running. We do all the insurance. We do all of that. And we make sure it's accessible for you. Motability Foundation, which I'm the governor of, one of the governors of, we have oversight of that. And we also give grants, because we know that some of these vehicles are really expensive. Like if you're looking at wheelchair accessible vehicle, your advance payment for that will be potentially £20,000. We help people afford that, but we also give grants to various organisations, including Sustrans, to look at how we make transport more widely accessible. And one of the things we did was we co-produced this EV charging point accessibility guide. We co-produced it with the Department for Zero Emissions Vehicles in the government. And this was because if you go to charge your EV, most of the charging points that are publicly available are not accessible to a lot of disabled people. And that'll be because the weight of the cables and the controllers are too heavy. The controllers aren't easily manipulable if you have upper body differences. There aren't drop curbs near them. They're often put in spaces that aren't wide enough for a blue badge space. So there were all of these additional challenges that nobody worldwide had considered when it came to disabled people. And the beauty of this was that it was entirely co-produced. So we had disabled people from very first principles coming with us and literally going, right, I can't lift this bit, Hannah. I'm going to struggle to connect this up. The weight of this, the force of this, here are the challenges I face. And it meant that we could get a really good gauge of what was actually needed and make sure that it was accessible for all. And this charter was quite exciting because we got to the point where Japanese and Italian governments were coming to us going, can we borrow that? Because we don't have anything. And it turned out nobody in the entire world had actually created some kind of standard for these charging points. And we've got to bear in mind, in the wider context of this, disabled people are going to be disproportionately, and already are being disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis. So disabled people are 2 to 4 times more likely to die following a natural disaster. And yet, so many of these sustainable plans and projects that we have don't include us at all. So we've created this charter, but the nightmare has been trying to get industry to pick it up, trying to get service stations to go, yeah, no, actually, we should probably make sure that people can use these. And until we get that next step done, until we get industry getting excited by this, it's yet another thing that is stopping disabled people from accessing electric vehicles. And you've got to bear in mind that that's, again, in a wider context where most of our public transport infrastructure is not disability friendly. If you Google me, I'm generally looking really cheesed off in a newspaper because I've been left on a train again. Honestly, I had to stop online dating. It was getting really awkward. But like that seems to be such a narrative. I can't get trains. I had to drive down here from Yorkshire yesterday. I didn't want to. I'd have loved to hop on a train, but that's not an option for people like me. And so we need to ensure that, yes, the wider infrastructure thinks of us, but that we have these additional standards in place, and that these additional standards, frankly, become law. And that's where we need our politicians to understand the demand for this and understand the implications of not doing this. So there is some great work going on out there, and we just need people to be screaming it from the rooftops, because at the moment, it's just not being found out about, it's not being heard about, and people like me are wheeling around going, please, just put a drop curb in, make this accessible, and people will use it. So we're getting there. Baby steps, or rolls. Baby rolls.
Baby rolls.
Yeah.
And then in the wider context of sustainability, obviously we've talked about ride sharing, electric vehicles, but also there's this need to take that next step into looking at how all of these things interact with the planet and interact with nature. So, Rosslyn, can you sort of share an example of a successful project where transport has seamlessly integrated with the environment and promoted biodiversity?
Yeah, definitely. So I've told you about Sustrans and what Sustrans do, and what we want to do is, we want to see that radically reduced traffic speed and volume, those cities and communities that are inclusive and safe, and we want to better connect people to green space. So I've told you about the National Cycle Network, and I've not told you that 4.5 million people use it every year, which I think is really impressive. And it's mainly actually owned by local authorities and partners, and we as Sustrans own just 270 miles of it, but we're the guardian of the whole network. But we've just published our biodiversity action plan, and that says that we have a mission to work with partners to develop the National Cycle Network into a network for nature. So we really appreciate that we're very much at the start of this journey, so we're in a real learning curve and learning mode, and the only way that we can achieve this is through huge amounts of partnership and collaboration and learning from the experts. So we're doing some great partnership work with the wildlife trusts nationally, with butterfly conservation nationally, National Trust, other big organisations, and then also some smaller organisations that are real specialists in different types of nature. So our approach is that we start with the place and we understand that local landscape and understand what makes a place special, and then think about how we can connect those landscape features using our routes and networks. So for the last 5 years, Sustrans has been allocated about £20 million a year by the Department for Transport to upgrade and create new routes. And over time, we sort of reflecting on this yesterday, I was thinking, we've really we started to enhance much more than just doing our statutory duties. At the start, we were very much like, well, just what do we have to do to get this route in, and what's the bare minimum that we need to do in terms of the ecology and the environmental impact. And now we are much more embracing what we can make, where we can make positive differences. And our ecology team has grown as a result of that. And now they're very much involved in that design stage, so right at the start, which is the big thing that's made the difference. So I've got 3 very quick examples of projects. So in Derbyshire, we've got the Cloud Trail in Derbyshire. That's a 1 kilometre of route. And we involved everyone in the team and how we would design that enhancement to the route. So the engineers designed it to minimise habitat loss. So they specified that we'd use dumper trucks that could go forward and backwards along the track, so that it didn't have to engineer in sort of turning circles, so we didn't have to remove habitat to bring in the materials soils for the surfacing. We imported low nutrient soils to match the area, and volunteers from our volunteering team sowed those native wildflowers. And then the land management team have been involved, and they've changed the grass cutting regime as well. So it's this kind of holistic effect. Now, does anybody know, if I talk about dingy skippers and grizzled skippers, what I'm talking about? Any answers there? Any creatures?
Bears?
Butterflies. Aren't they amazing names? The dingy skipper and the grizzled skipper. So in Newark, there's dingy skippers and grizzled skipper butterflies. We work with butterfly conservation to understand that those butterflies actually require bare or poor soil as part of their life cycle, because sparse vegetation and bare soils warm up much more quickly, and so it helps them get a head start in the spring. And so as a result of that, our engineers and designers specified that we would use poorer soils. And what's the win-win? Well, the win-win there is that it's cheaper to buy those poor soils in, and it's easier to maintain those poorer soils, and it's better for the butterflies. They lay their eggs they lay their eggs on the wild strawberry plants that we used as a part of the seed mix, so that we've got the whole life cycle, got the plants and the conditions there for the whole life cycle of those butterflies. And then finally, on the Lias line, which is an amazing flagship route, it's a 13-kilometre route between Leamington Spa and Rugby, and that was a huge opportunity for habitat creation. So we planted 250 native trees, we've dug 4 new ponds, we've diverted the route around existing grasslands. We've got a new mower that our ecologist is very excited about. It collects grass cuttings, and we can then use the grass cuttings to make habitat piles for reptiles and for amphibians. And we've also put sort of hibernacular in, that those are places for reptiles and amphibians to live, and bird and bat boxes as well. And what's exciting about that project is that it's projected to yield a biodiversity net gain. So you can have sort of credits, financial credits for biodiversity net gain, and we're looking to then trade those financial credits to basically fund the maintenance of that route in the longer term. So there's kind of like another win for nature there. And we're aiming to bring that this approach to all our routes nationally. I think it's something that's really, really exciting for how Sustrans is operating. We used to think, we're working in, cycling and walking, so we are an environmental organisation, just obviously. And what we've really realised in the past couple of years is actually there's a huge amount more that we can do, and we're learning all the time about how to have a much sort of a better impact for nature and less impact on climate change, and that's really important.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. That's enough questions from me, but we've got some from the audience in the room and online.
Yeah, so we can probably take one from online. So Tanishka asks, how do you see electrical air taxis, eVTOLs, playing a role in future mobility systems? For instance, the Paris Olympics are going to test them out for travel to and from airports, and it's on the agenda for more cities. Tanishka is curious about the inclusion and equity angle.
Do you have an answer on that, Ali? Because I don't. I could guess.
So I think it's very frustrating, the amount of time and effort that goes into trying to solve problems that don't need solving, and creating things that aren't going to help anyone apart from a very exclusive few. I'm not against at all some radical rethinking, and I mean, it's amazing how many inventions come when you set yourself a goal, but there's just so many better things that they could be doing with that time and effort in terms of making better use of what's already there. So personally, I'm not a fan of flying people around, so I think get somewhere quicker, much better to get all the cars off the road, stop people parking all over the pavements, and free up the road space so people could cycle to those events or go by e-scooter or something better. But I'm not a fan of flying people around. Anyone else?
Is it on? I'm a cyclist. Very proud to be a cyclist, road cyclist, gravel, and I'm very lucky to have an e-bike at the moment, which I use to and from work. But every day, someone nearly knocks me off my bike, and I'm a woman. So I can only imagine as a male cyclist what's happening. And I watched a panorama recently that if a driver hits a cyclist and unfortunately they died, actually they don't get done for murder or anything. And it made me realise, like, there are no laws about hitting cyclists. And I think it creates this sort of, motorists hate cyclists, cyclists end up hating motorists. And how are we going to change that culture? Because you're right, the future should be that more people are on bikes. Now e-bikes are becoming lower in price, so more accessible to people. So I think the real problem is changing what motorists think about cyclists and how cyclists think about motorists. How do you do that? That doesn't need, what you were talking about, flying in the sky. That doesn't need loads of money. It needs like a change of heart. So how do you do that?
Yeah, well, it's like the Fairphone, really, isn't it? I think it's about actually, about that behaviour change. And unfortunately, at the moment, we as Sustrans, we consider we're in a hostile environment. The government, unfortunately, is stating that they've got an action plan for drivers. And it's making explicit what's been implicit in terms of these sort of culture wars, and what's fanning the flames of that is our media, because we're in this very divisive, not sharing type of culture. And gosh, how do we solve that? I'm really not sure. But what I do hold dear to my heart is the fact that every 2 years Sustrans does a cycling and walking index, and we ask people, it's the largest survey of attitudes to walking and cycling in the UK. We ask people, what do you think about cycling and walking? What's your attitude? Would you want to do it? And every year I think, please say yes. And every year, 75% of people say, yeah, I would like to walk or cycle for short journeys. And so then as a politician, you might say, well, why? What's stopping them? Well, what's stopping them is that they don't feel safe. And they don't feel safe. Either that's and that's a real thing, or there's that perception of safety. And we're living in that world where, sadly, it's not safe. I can't say to people it's a safe thing to do. But what we do know is that more people want to do it, and we do know that there's a huge acceptance of protecting space for cycling and walking, but protecting space for cycling. We do know that there is more funding available for that, although it's reduced this year. There was, and it's reduced this year. Let's hope that maybe future governments will see more sense and increase funding for that. Interesting, I love what Ali was saying about sort of this, disrupting the business model. I say as a charity, what our objective should be is to put ourselves out of business. We should not be needed. Lots of other countries don't have a Sustrans because they don't need one. They don't need a charity that's saying, hey, it's great to walk and cycle for everyday journeys, because they're just doing it. So we need to create a world where we are not needed anymore. And I do see there's progress to that. And I do see, every time I see that there's another sort of as a competitor who's a profit-making organisation, some big consultancy, winning work from under our noses that's about cycling and walking, I try and kind of be quite philosophical about it and go, do you know what? That is amazing that we have created a world where it is possible for a profit-making organisation to win work from the charity, but to win work and to invest in a team that is specialising in cycling and walking, how to build infrastructure, how to change behaviours, and that's a real difference. And I kind of take that as Sustrans, as making that happen, because we have started to change what happens and have that big impact. I think it's that thing of being the disruptor and saying what needs to change and trying to make it happen. So with building our evidence base, showing people that it can be done, starting small and then getting it to grow at scale. Sustrans will never be able to grow, to do everything, and that shouldn't be our function. We should be doing the small things. And so I say to my team, we have a thing called wouldn't it be amazing goal. So wouldn't it be amazing if? So mine is, wouldn't it be amazing if Google would share that darn data so that we knew what was happening and stop sending people down those neighbourhood streets. But every person in our organisation has a wouldn't it be amazing goal that is really helping them to think about what's the future, what needs to happen, what needs to change, what's the new stuff that we're going to do as a charity that profit-making companies would never do because it's not going to create them any money. How are we going to push that agenda forward? So I hope that gives you some comfort that we're working very hard to make it safer.
Thank you.
So, I did say there were no more questions for me, but I've got a rapid-fire question for each of you. So, what key collaborator is missing that could advance what you're working on, and how can they get in touch with you? I'll start with you, Hannah.
Which key collaborator? Industry, I think, is the big one when it comes to disabled people, because, as I said, they just don't see us as financially viable. Hit me up. I'm on Insta. No. But yeah, I mean, we're very findable. There are 16 million disabled people in this country. Like, we're not exactly kind of quiet and unassuming in a corner. So yeah, I think industry needs to start having a proper look in the mirror. And A, are there any disabled people in that industry? We know we're underrepresented in it. And B, are they actually engaging with us? The answer is no, not yet. But we're well up for a coffee and a chat, chaps. Ali?
Similar, probably. I mean, politics just isn't working at the moment. So not any point in putting any energy there, I don't think. So it has to be business and employers. They have a huge role to play. They've been left out of the conversation for far too long. They are influencers. COVID showed that they have a huge role to play in dictating how we get to work and whether we can work from home or what we do. So I'd be engaging businesses. I'd be supporting their environmental teams. I'd be highlighting the huge impact that mobility has, not just on their emissions, but also on how happy their staff are. And I'll be highlighting that, we've got if you want to download something, go to Mobility Ways, the census survey. We just published it last week. It just highlights just how many of us are still working 5 days a week in the office when we only, so few of us want to do that. How many people are working from home that actually want to be in the office? I mean, it's really interesting seeing what's going on at the moment, but there are a lot of unhappy people at work right now. And if you're an employer and you're trying to keep your staff happy, look at how they're travelling, make that better, and you'll retain a much better workforce. So I would focus on employers.
Yeah, well, I would say communities. So I think that's, people know their local place, and we as Sustrans and through lots of other organisations have been guilty of going, we have the solution for you, here it is, ta-da, don't you love it? And people go, no thanks, we really don't want that. And so we've learned again over the years is to go out and ask people rather than tell them what's happening, and also be much more collaborative, much more about that we don't have all the answers, so saying, but there are lots of organisations, as Hannah was saying, lots of organisations out there who really do have the answers and really do know their subject and really are very keen to, and willing to collaborate and work with you, work with us, work together. And it is easy to find those people, and we very much like to go in and work with, those sort of community connectors as well, people who are like the leaders in their local community who know what's going on, know the people, and connect us into the sort of lock us into that community, and that's really important. So I think that local people is probably the thing for me.
And then just to round out the session, I think that it's clear from the questions that we've had and from our wonderful experts that the two keys to creating this future of future sustainable mobility is empathy and collaboration. So who aren't you talking to? Go and talk to them. Who is underrepresented in the room? Go and find them. And then when you have that conversation, collate that data and share that data so that others have it. So thank you very much for this session, for listening in.
That was really wonderful, and it really did live up to the hype that I set for it. I think, just to speak to something that Hannah was saying, it's been a real privilege for me in my day job at Connected Places Catapult to be part of the National Centre for Accessible Transport from the Motability Foundation, and particularly starting to think about that question about how do you create financially viable marketplaces for these solutions to emerge. I think it speaks to that maxim that if you design for the margins, you design for everyone. And I think too often we're often in transport, we're designing for speed. How quickly can we get from A to B? Whereas particularly in those moments of transfer or transition, you want to be designing for comfort, for ease, for accessibility. So really wishing all of these initiatives and organisations well, and thank you so much, Nicole, for that.